Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our second UDR webinar from this year, and I hope you have a fruitful session with us today. Today we will have two speakers, me, Gustavo Bacchi, Business Development Director for Europe, and my colleague Iris Van Hal, Program Manager UDR at SCS Global Services. And before we jump into the agenda of our session today, I would like to remember some rules for our webinar. So please use the question function from the GoToMeeting app to ask your questions and share your comments during the webinar. And there will be, in the end of our session today, a questions and answer session to clarify your questions. This session, this webinar will be recorded, and the webinar will be available to all attendees after this session. And after the webinar, you will receive an email with a link to the recording and presentation slides and additional resources discussed during this session. So, what is the agenda of our webinar today? We will start introducing, for those who are not familiar with SCS Global Services, a quick overview about our organization, an overview and timeline of the UDR, how to meet the UDR strict supply chain and due diligence requirements, latest updates on UDR recently published by the European Commission, and after that, the new UDR guidance document, an update on the frequent asked questions, and in the end of this session, we will cover SCS UDR supporting services. And in the last part, we will go through the questions. So, starting with the first topic of our agenda today, for those who are not familiar with SCS, SCS Global Services is a third-party sustainability organization doing certification, consulting, and standard development for 40 years. The company has currently more than 30,000 certificates issued in more than 120 countries, and more than 15,000 clients benefiting from our services, including corporate, government, and NGOs. As I said, 40 years of experience, and auditors are present in major markets. On the SCS organization, the company is divided in different divisions with specific activities separated by legal entities. And the first one is the traditional certification body, doing certification, verification, and auditing. There is another organization in charge of developing standards. This is the SCS standards. And supporting companies on several services, for example, corporate reporting, carbon related services. We have SCS consulting. And on the climate mitigation projects and marketplace, SCS Global Registry. And in this slide, we can see our global reach. So it's really hard to find a region where we don't have local presence, clients, and it's a very, very international organization, as you can see here in this map. So with that covered, I will hand over the next session of this presentation to my colleague Iris, which will go through the second topic of our agenda today. Iris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gustavo. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending our webinar. So yeah, now that you hopefully have a better picture of what SCS stands for and what we can offer, I would like to tell you a little bit more about the EUDR, the implementation timeline, and the services that SCS has developed to support you. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So by now, I think everyone here attending has heard about the EUDR, so I will dive in directly. The EUDR stands for the European Union Deforestation-Free Products Regulation, and it aims to combat global deforestation. It's part of the European Union Green Deal, and the regulation applies to 7 commodities, which you can also see on the presentation. These are soy, beef, palm oil, wood, cocoa, coffee, and rubber, and certain derived products of these commodities. Now, the requirements of the regulation are that commodities and certain derived products are to be deforestation-free and legally produced according to the laws in the country of origin. The geo-coordinates of all production plots are also to be collected and have to accompany each consignment or shipment. At last, operators and some traders in Europe have to submit a due diligence statement for each batch of products that is placed on the market or that is exported. So these statements are required only from operators and traders in Europe, not from farmers or exporters from countries outside of the EU. The compliance deadline is now set to be the end of this year, the 30th of December, for all operators and traders, and for micro and small enterprises, which is abbreviated with SMEs, established before December 31st, 2020, a different compliance deadline applies of June 30th, 2025. However, if we go to the next slide, I will show you that, and this is something, we first go to a poll question. Can we quickly go to the next slide, because I want to talk about the deadline, the timeline. Yes, I mentioned some dates earlier, but as some of you might know, earlier this month, the European Commission proposed to delay the implementation of the regulation by a year to allow for additional time to prepare for the regulation. But this is still to be approved by the European Parliament. And if this extension is approved, which is highly likely to happen, the additional year could serve as a phasing in period to ensure that there's a proper and effective implementation of the regulation. And to support with this, the European Commission has also published additional guidance documents and a stronger international cooperation framework to support stakeholders, member states, and third countries in the preparation for the implementation of the EUDR. And then on the next slide, I will show you this new or revised timeline. And then we can go back to the poll, but I want to conclude this first. So again, this would be the new timeline that will be voted upon by the European Parliament in a session in mid-November. There are 2 dates, however, that will not change, regardless of what the outcome of the voting will be. And those are the cutoff date for deforestation and forest degradation. And this date is December 31st, 2020, meaning that only products that have been produced on land that has not been subject to deforestation or forest degradation after the 31st of December 2020 will be allowed on the EU market or can be exported from the EU. And the second date that will not be changed is the date that the EUDR entered into force, which is June 29, 2023. But the dates that would highly likely change are the dates for operators and traders to comply with the EUDR, and that would be then exactly 1 year later on December 30th, 2025. And for micro and small enterprises, the new date would be June 30th, 2026. provided, however, that these SMEs are established before December 31st, 2020, and that they were not subject to the EU timber regulation, which is preceding the EUDR. So now that we have clarity on the timeline, we can go back to the poll. And yes, we would like to ask you, so we will now activate a poll in this software, and we would like to ask you if your company operates inside or outside of the EU. So you can select one option. Everyone can participate, and we'll give you a couple of seconds, and then we can look at the results together. So if everyone has submitted their vote, then I hope my colleagues can share with us the results. Okay, so for everyone's reference, we have about 200 attendees in this webinar at the moment, and there are 71% outside of the EU, so the big majority, and 30%, 1/3 inside the EU. All right, interesting. Okay, then we go back to the regulation. Well, we can, yes, one slide further. Yes, thank you very much. So as I mentioned before, the key commodities that are covered are listed once again here: soy, beef, palm oil, wood, cocoa, coffee, and rubber. And there are certain derived products. These are all listed in Annex 1 of the EUDR. And each commodity in Annex 1 is also assigned a specific HS, which stands for Harmonized System, and the CN, which stands for Combined Nomenclature Code, for proper classification. And this allows authorities and businesses to track and regulate the trade of these commodities and how they will fall into different regulatory frameworks. Next slide, please. So for you to determine if your product is subject to the EUDR, we developed this decision tree that you can use. And here we use these codes that are referenced earlier, this HS code. And if it's listed in Annex 1, you will go up with yes. If it's not listed, then you already know it's not subject to EUDR. And then if the product contains any of the 7 commodities that I showed, if yes, you will move up. If not, then the product is not subject to the EUDR. And if the product is explicitly excluded in Annex 1, or if it's used as packaging material only, or if it's produced from 100% waste, if the answer to these questions is yes, or one of these questions is yes, the EUDR does not apply. If the answer is no, then the product is subject to the EUDR requirements. On the next slides, we will show the data. Oh, we have another poll question. I'm sorry. We would like to know what your company's main role is regarding EUDR compliance. You can again select one option. If you're a producer organization, this can be a cooperation or a farmers association, etc. Are you a manufacturer? Are you here as a trader, or something else, or not applicable to you? So everyone submitted their votes. Let's look at the results. Again, we had about 200 participants, and okay, half of the participants are manufacturers, 26 not applicable. Then we have some traders, and only 8% as producers. Thank you all very much for participating. All right, then on the next slide, yes, I will go over the data collection and traceability that is required under the EUDR. The data that is to be collected includes commodity type using the CN codes, the quantity of the commodity, the country of origin, the date of production. And this date of production here means the actual harvesting date. So if it's wood, you usually would not cut a whole forest completely at once. You can have it as a range of dates. And in case of livestock, it will be the grazing periods. So then you also need the exact coordinates of all the plots where the commodity was grown or harvested or raised. And you also need the details of the suppliers in the supply chain. That would include their legal name, their address, their contact information, etc. And operators also have to prove the legality of the commodity, for example, through providing land titles, licenses, certification, or other relevant documents. And the exact obligation on what actions to take and what data to provide further depends on the size of the operator or the trader, whether they are an SME or not, and whether they are the first entity in the supply chain or are further down the supply chain. So now we go to the next slide, where we have another decision tree to help determine if an entity is an operator or a trader. And these are quite tricky terms, so we hope that this helps. Now, the operator is any natural or legal person placing relevant products on the market, meaning to export goods, as you can see in the first top part of the tree. So if you export products in the EU, if the answer is yes, you are classified as an operator. A manufacturer can also be classified as an operator when they take one commodity and then change this commodity. For example, they have a product with one CN code and they change the product so that the CN code changes. For example, if you change cocoa butter into chocolate. An operator can also be an importer of this cocoa butter, and it can be one person or a whole company. Now, traders are entities in the supply chain that do not manufacture or produce products themselves, but they only make them available on the market. So they would buy from somebody and then they would sell it to another entity. So they would have a role in commercializing the product. This can, for example, be a supermarket chain or retailers. And a trader can also buy from an operator and then sell the product to another operator that will then make changes to the product and creates a new CN code for the product. Now, to give you an example of this, we have prepared a next slide where we combine the terminology of operators and traders and show which actors in the supply chain have which responsibilities, which can include to submit a due diligence statement, which is an important element of the EUDR and to comply with the EUDR. So this example is for domestic EU timber that is exported as furniture. So we will start on the left with an operator who is harvesting the timber. And this operator, or in this, the producer, has to submit a due diligence statement. Now, if we move one step to the right, we have a sawmill that is an SME downstream operator that buys the timber. And they do not have to exercise the due diligence, but they have to make sure that they receive the due diligence statement and the due diligence reference number from the entity before them in the supply chain. So that is the harvester of the wood. If the downstream operator now sells the wood to a trader, the trader also does not have this due diligence obligation. The trader can take the due diligence number from the first operator that was delivered to them by the downstream operator. Now, when the trader sells to a large downstream operator or a large downstream trader, these entities would have to check the due diligence. And what this means is they don't have to conduct the due diligence in its entirety, but they have to check that the process that was done by the first operator, so the entity that harvested the wood, is correct. Then they submit this due diligence statement, including the statement from the first operator, so that this can all be controlled. Now on the next slide, thank you. We have some updates on the EUDR, which are recently published and that we would like to go over with you. So first is the proposal for the 12-month delay in the EUDR implementation, and we already went over this as I showed you the timeline and the potential change of dates and the 2 dates that will not change. Second, there have been new guidance documents published, and there is a certain overlap with documents that were leaked in April, but there are still many new changes, and I will go over these in a separate slide in a minute. Third, there has been a new frequently asked questions document published. This is pretty significant as well, so I will also go over some of this separately. Fourth, there also has been made an introduction to the country benchmarking system, and this system details the principles for classifying countries as low, standard, or high risk of deforestation. And it is expected that the majority of countries will be classified as low risk, so that there can be a focus on the rather hotspots where deforestation happens. And what it means if countries are classified as low risk is that they can follow a simplified due diligence process. Fifth, there are updates to the EUDR information system, which is where you submit the due diligence statement. A user guide is published as well, and the training is offered about 4 or 5 times a month, but it is unfortunately rather booked out very quickly. And lastly, new tariff documents and codes for imports and exports have been published. What this means is that when exporting products under the EUDR, the 8-digit CN codes apply that specify the exact commodity. But when you import products, there's a 10-digit tariff code. So for those of you who work with customs, please check out the tariff codes and the documents created for the EUDR. Next slide, please. Now, as I promised, I will go over some of the highlights of the new guidance documents that have been published. And we will start with the clarified definitions and scopes. For example, for the terms placing on the market, making available on the market, and export. Now, when a company imports something and puts it in their inventory to sell it, but they will only sell it at a later moment, maybe in a few months, is that then considered placing on a market or not? The guidance document clarifies this, and it states that it's not the selling date that determines the placing on the market, but rather the date that a product is available to be sold. That is the date it is placed on the market. It also explains for a few scenarios what it means to be an operator, and we think this is quite helpful because, as you might have seen in the decision tree that I showed earlier, it's not that straightforward. And there's also more guidance on the time frame for application of the regulation. For the due diligence requirements, the guidance explains the due diligence process, including information collection, risk assessment, and risk mitigation. It also defines negligible risk and how it should be assessed. And it clarifies obligations for SME and non-SME operators and traders. For the topic of legality, the documents explain what constitutes relevant legislation of the country of production, and it also outlines how operators should assess compliance with legality requirements. For product scope, it clarifies how the regulation applies to packaging materials and explains the treatment of waste and recovered products under the regulation. For composite products, it provides guidance on the information requirements and due diligence for products containing multiple relevant commodities. And this means that for composite products, the due diligence is to be submitted for the main commodity or product. And we have an example of this later on when we go over some FAQ questions. For certification and third-party verification, the guidance explains the role of certification schemes in risk assessment. and it provides criteria for evaluating the reliability of such schemes. Now, this shows us that certification and third-party verification will play a bigger role in the EUDR than initially indicated by the European Commission, and there will also be additional guidance specified for third-party verification. And lastly, for agricultural use, the guidance clarifies the definition of forest and agricultural use and explains how to assess land use changes and exceptions. We can go to the next slide, where I will go over some questions from the updated FAQ with you. Now, please note that the FAQ is not legally binding and does not engage the Commission's liability. So first, we have FAQ 5.19 stating that a single due diligence statement is allowed to cover multiple shipments or batches. This means that operators can confirm that due diligence was conducted for all products intended for the EU market or export, ensuring compliance with the regulation. But certain conditions must still be met, which are that the DDS, which is the due diligence statement, must cover all quantities before products are placed on the market or exported, and a new due diligence statement is required once the quantity covered by an existing due diligence statement is fully marketed. And a due diligence statement cannot cover a period longer than 1 year from submission. And third, covering multiple shipments in one due diligence statement increases the complexity and potential risk of non-compliance, which may affect checks by competent authorities. On the next slide, we have FAQ 1.18, which puts 2 limits on the declaration in excess, so that it only applies to bulk commodities and it is not allowed on a regional or countrywide basis. FAQ 4.5 clarifies the interpretation of the phrase without inducing forest degradation within the definition of deforestation-free for products that contain or are made using wood. And the EUDR is targeted to prevent forest degradation resulting from forestry activities, not as a result of other processes like climate change or natural disasters. So only if forest degradation is caused by human activity like harvesting, a product would be non-compliant under the EUDR. Next slide, please. Here we have FAQ 1.3, clarifying that for composite products containing multiple commodities, due diligence is required only for the main commodity listed in Annex 1 of the EUDR. For example, if a chocolate bar contains cocoa and palm oil, the due diligence is to be focused on cocoa, which is the main commodity, even if the final product, the chocolate, also contains palm oil. FAQ 1.25 focuses on the requirement for operators to collect information on the date or time range of production for commodities under the EUDR. For example, the regulation does not apply to cattle that is born before the EUDR entered into force on June 29, 2023. So cattle born before this date is exempt from the regulation's requirements. On the next slide, we have the last FAQ that we go over, but there are many more, so I really recommend that you look at the document. FAQ 4.8 confirms that operators can be held liable only for forest degradation events that occur before the due diligence statement is submitted. If due diligence was properly conducted and products were compliant at the time that they were placed on the market, any other events that could not have been identified as risks at the time of submitting the due diligence statement will not affect an entity's compliance status. So again, I only presented parts of the new updates of the guidance documents and parts of the FAQ because there are quite a lot. And if you want to dive deeper into this material or gain a better understanding of the EUDR, we can also recommend to take our self-paced online course. Gustavo will tell you more about this in a minute, but with that you will have access to all relevant information and also receive updates as they come from the European Commission and have these explained. All right, in the next slide, I have some images on what the EUDR information system will look like. So this is the portal for European entities where they can submit information on their due diligence. And the yellow screen in the middle shows what it would look like to submit geo-coordinates for the due diligence statement. Now, the EU has also published an information system user guide with more guidance. And this information system should already be available as of November this year. That would allow you to submit your due diligence statement already and get a response from the EU. So you can use it as a test period. Next slide, please. So here we have an overview of the main penalties for non-compliance with the EUDR. And as you can see in the first row, fines can be up to 4% of the operator or the trader's total annual turnover in the preceding financial year, which is, or it can be quite significant for larger companies. Also, the products can be confiscated and operators or traders could be temporarily excluded from public procurement. There also could be due diligence restrictions where you have to meet stricter due diligence requirements. So now we have given you a summary of the guidance document and the updated FAQ, and that there will likely be an additional year to prepare for EUDR compliance. However, we would really recommend to start now or continue working towards your EUDR compliance to prepare yourself and not wait until November next year, so that you have enough time also to implement additional measures as needed, maybe apply for certification add-ons or EUDR verification services. Because if mistakes are made once the EUDR is implemented, there can be strict penalties involved, as you can see here. So with that, I will hand back over to Gustavo, who will tell you more about the EUDR services that SCS offers to help you, to support you. And yeah, Gustavo, back to you.
Thank you, Iris. This was really nice overview about the regulation, and as you said, I would like to introduce to those who are not familiar the solutions that we developed to support companies in implementing the EUDR requirements. Starting with consulting services. I will, in the next slide, break down a little bit and clarify how our experts can help companies to understand and then develop strategies and implement proper internal procedures, such as the due diligence systems. And within those organizations that are or more advanced in the implementation of the EUDR, we developed two types of assessments. So the compliance assessment and the due diligence integrity assessment. I will explain the differences between both as well in the coming slides. And finally, the self-paced trainings. It's an online training resource that you can engage completely online and learn more about different aspects and practical implementation solutions through those trainings. I will now jump into this chart to explain a little bit from where comes our experience. it's simply based on our 40 years of verification on the ground. So we are checking exactly the same requirements. I'm talking about deforestation, legality, and social issues during the last 40 years. So we are checking this because we are approved as a certification body to conduct audits on behalf of several standards. And here in this slide, you can see just a small list of standards which contains exactly the same criteria. So this means SES has a really, really rich experience, isn't it? And this was the base or the ingredients that made us very comfortable to develop the solutions that we are talking about at this point. The main message here is I think anyone can read the regulation, can read the FAQ, can read the guidance documents, and clearly understand what is clearly defined so far. However, if you have the experience from the ground, it's much, much easier and faster to identify how you can implement and what is really pragmatic in terms of practical solutions that must be implemented. So based on that, I would also like to update all of you on the developments from different standards in relation to the so-called add-ons or UDR add-ons. You can see here in this table that FSC, PFC, and the SFI decided to develop their add-ons, and this will be available very soon also through SES. You can see here on the right-hand side the status of the implementation of those services. Also under development for SVP, and also the case for Rainforest Alliance. In this slide, we see also another option for the EUDR add-on, which is the ISCC. And according to our plan, it will be available for companies in December this year. The other standards listed here in this chart, so far, this could change in the future, but so far, according to the latest information we have, they are not providing any add-ons to on top of their standard. However, RSPO decided to publish a gap analysis to identify the differences between RSPO and UDR, which is a very useful tool as well. And now jumping into the first option that I mentioned before, SES UDR consulting services developed to help companies to achieve and to comply with the UDR compliance. We know very well that each company requires a specific approach, and that's why there are several solutions, several possibilities that companies can choose, and also combining some options in order to help them to understand and to implement. And I would like only to highlight here some examples. So companies can also hire SES to provide a workshop for suppliers, for their suppliers to understand what they need to do in terms of data collection and traceability, for example. Gap analysis, to understand, to take a picture on where we are and identify the missing pieces in order to complete the whole implementation. Deforestation risk assessment. This is a very important activity that we can also help you to implement. Boundary data collection workshop, so to define the sourcing area and to define where exactly companies will be required to collect data. And tailored internal policies and due diligence statement development. We can also help companies to implement. Just to give you an idea on certain options, there are much more options that we developed and we are ready to deliver. But those, are the ones that most of our customers are benefiting from. And now moving to the second option that I mentioned in the previous slide, which is the UDR compliance assessment. This solution was developed and tailored for stakeholders operating outside EU. For instance, farmers, co-ops, exporters, so companies that are producing the commodities under the UDR. And within this assessment, we can check and confirm compliance or eventually identify potential gaps. And this is a very interesting solution to strengthen trust and business relations with European importers. And you can see here on the bottom of this chart an example of a simplified coffee supply chain. So yeah, the typical users of the compliance assessment would be on the left-hand side, as I mentioned. The next option that we are ready to deliver to companies is the due diligence integrity assessment. This option was developed mostly for stakeholders operating within the European Union, such as importers, processors, brand owners that are bringing those commodities into the European market. And the main target, not limited to, but the main target is to identify and to assess and to produce a detailed report on the due diligence system already implemented. Also to verify the risk assessment and mitigation measures internally developed and see how complete the whole system is functioning. We also can, with this solution, compare the due diligence statements from the past and the current ones, and aiming to support companies to prepare for a potential audit conducted by the competent authorities. And on the simplified cocoa supply chain in this chart, mostly companies on the right side would benefit from this service as well. Now moving to the self-paced trainings, as also mentioned by my colleague Iris, it's a very, very interesting tool for companies to understand and to go deeper into the understanding of the requirements, and it provides a good overview of the whole regulation for all commodities. And the main benefits, I know it's a lot of text here, but I'll try to summarize from the self-paced training, which is basically to identify the impact into those commodities under the UDR, and also derived products subject to the UDR. And in relation to the understanding if my product is subject or not to the regulation. This is the first step, the first assessment that anyone can do, and the trainings were designed also to help to answer this question. On the due diligence process, also a very deep dive on the whole process, from data collection at plot level, at farm level, up to the final due diligence statement procedures and documentation. So a complete overview of the entire process. Geospatial technologies and remote sensing, key tools to identify risks related to deforestation and forest degradation. Third-party certifications and their role in this process, and how companies can also use those solutions to support their implementation. Data collection from legality and social issues, and also a very important source of information to keep you updated. So we will continue including updates as soon as we have official documents coming from the authorities, from the Commission. Our trainings will be updated and available for your benefit. Contact us if you have specific needs, questions. We will be happy to support you on this journey. Iris, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. Muhammad, thank you very much for your support. And with that, thank you everybody again for your participation.
Thank you.